Princess Elena Valdoria stood at the towering windows of Ravencrest Palace, watching the morning mist roll across the emerald gardens that had been her prison for 23 years. The ornate golden frame of the window felt like bars to her, beautiful but confining. Today was supposed to be different. Today, she was meant to announce her engagement to Duke Marcus Ashworth, a man chosen by the royal council rather than her heart. The kingdom of Valdoria had prospered under her father King Aldric's rule for 3 decades, but recent economic struggles and political tensions with neighboring realms had left the crown vulnerable. The marriage alliance with the powerful Ashworth Duchy was seen as essential for the kingdom's survival. Elena understood duty, had been raised on it like mother's milk, but understanding and accepting were vastly different things. Her lady-in-waiting, Catherine, entered the chamber carrying the ceremonial blue gown that would mark Elena's formal acceptance of the betrothal. The silk fabric shimmered like captured starlight, embroidered with silver threads that told the story of Valdoria's founding. It was breathtaking and suffocating all at once. "Your Highness, the seamstress wishes to make final adjustments," Catherine said softly, her eyes avoiding Elena's gaze. They had grown up together, and Catherine knew better than anyone how much this marriage arrangement tormented the princess. Elena turned from the window, her auburn hair catching the morning light. "Tell me honestly, Catherine, if you were in my position, could you go through with it?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that went far beyond royal protocol. Catherine set down the gown carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. "I think, Your Highness, that sometimes the greatest act of love is sacrifice. But I also think that a kingdom built on the unhappiness of its future queen may not be as strong as one built on genuine partnership." The wisdom in her friend's words struck Elena deeply. She had spent countless nights wondering if her personal happiness was worth the potential suffering of millions of subjects who depended on the crown's stability. The weight of an entire kingdom's future rested on her shoulders, and, at 23, she sometimes felt as though she were drowning beneath that responsibility. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," Elena called, and her younger brother Prince Alexander strode in, his usually cheerful demeanor notably absent. At 19, Alexander possessed their father's sharp intellect and their late mother's compassionate heart. He was also Elena's closest confidant, and the only person who truly understood the burden she carried. "The Duke has arrived early," Alexander announced, his jaw tight, with barely controlled anger. "Father wants you in the throne room within the hour for the preliminary ceremonies." He paused, studying his sister's pale face. "Elena, you don't have to do this. There are other ways to secure the kingdom's future." Elena knew Alexander referred to his own willingness to take on greater responsibilities, perhaps even to abdicate his own future claims if it meant she could choose her own path. But the laws of succession were clear, and more importantly, Elena had never been one to shirk her duties, no matter how painful they might be. "What kind of ruler would I be if I put my own desires above the welfare of our people?" Elena asked, though her voice lacked conviction. "Duke Marcus is a good man, respected and wealthy. Our children will unite 2 of the most powerful houses in the realm. It's a sound political match. But do you love him?" Alexander pressed, stepping closer to his sister. "Have you ever even had a proper conversation with him beyond formal pleasantries?" The truth was that Elena barely knew Duke Marcus beyond his reputation. He was 15 years her senior, recently widowed, with 2 young children who would become her responsibility. He was known to be fair in his dealings, charitable to his tenants, and loyal to the crown. On paper, he was everything a princess could want in a husband. In reality, Elena felt nothing when she looked at him except a vague sense of resignation. "Love is a luxury that royal blood cannot afford," Elena replied, repeating words that had been drilled into her since childhood. But, even as she spoke them, she thought of the stable master's son, James, whose easy laugh and genuine kindness had captured her heart during stolen moments in the palace gardens. Their friendship was impossible, forbidden, and entirely precious to her. Alexander moved to the window where his sister had been standing, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Mother loved father, and their marriage strengthened the kingdom more than any political alliance ever could. People followed them because they believed in what they represented together. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes at the mention of their mother, Queen Isabella, who had died when Elena was 16. Isabella had been beloved by the people, known for her charity work and her deep devotion to both her family and her subjects. She had often told Elena that true strength came from ruling with both head and heart. But how could Elena follow that advice when her heart was pulling her in the opposite direction of her duty? The cathedral bells began to chime, marking the hour and reminding Elena that time was running short. Soon, she would have to don the blue gown, join her father and Duke Marcus in the throne room, and begin the formal process that would seal her fate. The engagement ceremony would be followed by months of wedding preparations, during which she would be expected to learn to manage the Duke's household and care for his children. "Promise me something, Alexander," Elena said suddenly, turning to face her brother with newfound determination in her green eyes. "Promise me that when you rule, you'll remember this moment. Remember what it feels like to watch duty and desire tear someone apart. And promise me you'll find a way to be both a good king and a happy man." Alexander crossed the room and took his sister's hands in his. "I promise, Elena. But I also promise that I won't stop looking for another solution. This isn't over until you speak the vows." And even then, he left the sentence unfinished. But Elena understood. Her brother would never stop fighting for her happiness, even if she had given up fighting for it herself. As Catherine began the process of helping Elena into the ceremonial gown, the princess allowed herself one last look out the window toward the stables where James would be tending to the horses, unaware that the woman he had unknowingly stolen from nobility was about to pledge herself to another. The irony wasn't lost on Elena that in a palace filled with hundreds of people, she had never felt more alone. The blue silk settled around her shoulders like a mantle of responsibility, beautiful and crushing in equal measure. In less than an hour, she would take the first irreversible step toward a future that felt like a carefully constructed cage, gilded and proper, but a cage nonetheless. The girl who had once dreamed of traveling beyond Valdoria's borders, of making a difference in the world through her own choices rather than her bloodline, would begin to disappear, replaced by the perfect royal bride that duty demanded. Yet as Elena looked at her reflection in the ornate mirror, she saw not just resignation, but a flicker of something else. Perhaps it was hope, or perhaps it was simply the stubborn streak that had gotten her into trouble as a child. Whatever it was, it whispered that her story was not yet written, that even princesses sometimes found ways to change their fate. The first part of Elena's journey was ending, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was not ending the way everyone expected. Duke Marcus Ashworth arrived at Ravencrest Palace with a procession that spoke of wealth and power. His carriage, crafted from the finest ebony wood and trimmed in silver, was drawn by 4 magnificent black stallions whose hooves rang against the cobblestones like thunder. Behind him followed carriages bearing his household staff, wedding gifts, and, most importantly, his 2 children from his first marriage. Lady Margaret, his 8-year-old daughter, peered out from the carriage window with curious blue eyes that reminded Elena painfully of her own childhood wonder. Beside her sat 12-year-old Lord Thomas, whose serious demeanor and protective stance over his sister suggested he had grown up too quickly in the wake of their mother's death 2 years prior. King Aldrich waited in the palace courtyard, resplendent in his formal robes of state, but Elena could see the weariness in her father's eyes. The past year had aged him considerably. The failed harvest in the eastern provinces, combined with increased military tensions along the border with the aggressive kingdom of Draven, had left him looking more like 65 than his actual 52 years. "Your Majesty," Duke Marcus said as he dismounted, his bow perfectly calibrated to show respect without subservience. He was a handsome man, Elena had to admit, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines around brown eyes that spoke of a generally pleasant disposition. If circumstances were different, she might have found herself genuinely attracted to him. "Welcome, Marcus," King Aldrich replied, clasping the Duke's shoulder in a gesture that was both formal and genuinely warm. The 2 men had known each other for years, and Elena knew her father respected Marcus both as a leader and as a man. This knowledge made her situation even more complicated, because she couldn't even hate her intended husband. Elena descended the palace steps with carefully practiced grace, her blue gown flowing around her like water. She had spent the past hour learning to school her features into an expression of serene acceptance, though inside, she felt as though she were walking to her own execution. Alexander walked beside her, his presence both comforting and a reminder of what she was sacrificing. "Your Highness," Marcus said, taking Elena's offered hand and kissing it gently. His touch was warm and respectful, nothing to object to, and yet Elena felt nothing beyond polite acknowledgement. "You look radiant. I hope the journey ahead will bring us both great joy." "Thank you, Your Grace, Elena replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. I look forward to meeting your children properly. I understand they have traveled with you today. Marcus's face brightened genuinely at the mention of his children, and Elena caught a glimpse of the man behind the political alliance. They are eager to meet you as well. Margaret especially has been asking endless questions about what it will be like to have a new mother figure. I hope you don't mind the responsibility. Elena's heart clenched at the word mother. She had always imagined having children of her own someday, but she had pictured raising them with someone she loved, someone who would be a true partner in both parenting and life. Now she faced the prospect of becoming a stepmother to children who would be looking to her for comfort and guidance while she herself felt lost and uncertain. I would be honored to help guide them, Elena said, and for the first time that day, she spoke with complete honesty. Whatever her feelings about the marriage itself, she would never let innocent children suffer for the political machinations of adults. The formal introductions took place in the palace's grand receiving hall, a room that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies and diplomatic meetings. The walls were lined with portraits of Valdoria's monarchs, their painted eyes seeming to watch Elena as she played her part in continuing their dynasty's traditions. Young Margaret proved to be a delightful child, full of questions about the palace, about Elena's gowns, and about whether she knew any stories about princesses and dragons. Her innocence and enthusiasm reminded Elena so much of her own childhood that she found herself genuinely smiling for the first time all day. Thomas was more reserved, studying Elena with the careful assessment of a boy who had learned not to trust easily. When she knelt to speak with him at his eye level, showing him the respect of treating him as an individual rather than simply a child, she saw some of the wariness leave his expression. Will you really be our new mother? Thomas asked directly, his 12-year-old bluntness cutting through all pretense. Elena glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly, then looked back at the boy. I will be your father's wife, which makes me your stepmother. But I hope that over time, we can become something even more important than that. I hope we can become friends who care about each other's happiness. It was the right answer, Elena could tell, because Thomas's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he actually smiled. Margaret, meanwhile, had become fascinated with Elena's jewelry and was asking detailed questions about each piece, displaying an early appreciation for beautiful things that reminded Elena of herself at that age. As the afternoon progressed through formal ceremonies and elaborate meals, Elena found herself settling into a routine that wasn't entirely unpleasant. Marcus was an excellent conversationalist, well-read, and interested in her opinions on topics ranging from literature to statecraft. His children were bright and engaging, clearly well-loved and well-raised despite the tragedy of losing their mother. But as evening fell and Elena retreated to her chambers, she felt the weight of what she was giving up settling over her like a physical burden. From her window, she could see lights in the stable quarters where James would be settling the horses for the night. Soon, very soon, even these glimpses of the life she might have chosen would be taken from her as she moved to Marcus's estate to begin her new life as a duchess. Catherine helped her out of the formal gown, replacing it with a simple nightdress that felt like freedom after the structured corsetry of court attire. How are you feeling, Your Highness? Catherine asked softly, brushing Elena's long hair with gentle strokes. Like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, Elena admitted. I can see the life spreading out below me, and it's not a bad life. Marcus is kind, his children are lovely, and I'll have a chance to do real good as a duchess. But I also feel like I'm about to lose myself entirely, like the Elena who exists right now will cease to be tomorrow. Catherine paused in her brushing, meeting Elena's eyes in the mirror. Perhaps the Elena who exists right now will simply grow into someone larger. Someone who can contain both duty and personal happiness. You're stronger than you know, Your Highness. A soft knock at the chamber door interrupted them. Come in, Elena called, expecting Alexander or perhaps one of the palace servants. Instead, King Aldrich entered, still wearing his formal robes but, with his crown set aside, looking more like a concerned father than a monarch. May I speak with you privately, Elena? He asked, and Catherine immediately curtsied and withdrew, leaving father and daughter alone. King Aldrich moved to the window where Elena had spent so much time that day, gazing out at his kingdom. Your mother stood at this same window the night before our wedding, he said quietly. Did you know that? Elena shook her head, moving to stand beside her father. She told me later that she had been terrified she was making a mistake, that she was too young to know her own heart, and too inexperienced to be a queen. But she also said that sometimes the most important decisions feel impossible because they are important. Aldrich turned to face his daughter. I loved your mother from the moment I met her. But even with love, marriage is a leap of faith. Did you ever regret it? Elena asked. The responsibility, the sacrifice of privacy, the weight of always having to put the kingdom first. Her father considered the question seriously. There were moments when I envied common men their simple choices. But regret? Never. Your mother and I built something together that was larger than either of us could have created alone. We made decisions that improved thousands of lives. We raised children who will continue that work, and we found joy in the midst of duty. Elena felt tears threatening again. But you chose each other. I'm being chosen for, not choosing. That's true, Aldrich acknowledged. But, Elena, choice isn't just about the beginning of a path. It's about what you do with each step you take along the way. Marcus is a good man who will respect and value you. His children need guidance and love. There is opportunity for real happiness there, if you choose to find it. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over the kingdom that would soon pass to Elena's care in partnership with a man she barely knew. Elena thought about her mother, young and frightened but willing to trust in the possibility of love and purpose growing from duty and commitment. Will you tell me something about mother that I don't know? Elena asked finally. King Aldrich smiled, the expression transforming his careworn face. She used to sneak down to the kitchens at midnight to bake bread when she was worried about something. She said kneading dough helped her think clearly. The kitchen staff learned to leave ingredients out for her, and she would always make extra loaves to distribute to the servants the next morning. Elena could picture it perfectly, her elegant mother with flour in her hair, working through problems with her hands while her mind processed solutions. It was an image that made Queen Isabella seem more human, more accessible, and somehow more inspiring. Tomorrow will be difficult, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Tomorrow will be a beginning, her father replied. And you are your mother's daughter. You will find ways to make that beginning beautiful. As King Aldrich kissed his daughter's forehead and bid her good night, Elena felt a shift in her perspective. She was still afraid, still mourning the future she had imagined, but she was also beginning to see possibility in the path before her. Perhaps Catherine was right. Perhaps the Elena of tomorrow could be larger, stronger, and more capable than the Elena of today. The second part of her journey was beginning, and while it wasn't the journey she had chosen, it was hers to shape. 3 months after the formal engagement ceremony, Elena found herself settling into an unexpected rhythm at Ashworth Manor, Marcus's ancestral estate located 2 days' ride from the capital. The sprawling castle, built from warm golden stone that caught the morning light beautifully, had become more home than she had anticipated. The upcoming wedding, now only weeks away, felt both inevitable and surreal. Margaret had attached herself to Elena with the fierce devotion only an 8-year-old could muster. She followed Elena through the gardens, helped arrange flowers for the great hall, and peppered her with endless questions about palace life and royal customs. Her innocent enthusiasm had become one of Elena's greatest sources of joy during this period of adjustment. Thomas remained more cautious, but Elena had earned his respect through patient attention to his interests in history and military strategy. She had begun teaching him about statecraft and diplomacy, skills that would serve him well as the future Duke of Ashworth. His sharp mind reminded her of Alexander, and she found genuine pleasure in watching him grapple with complex ideas. Marcus himself had proven to be everything Elena had hoped, and yet somehow less than her heart longed for. He was unfailingly kind, intellectually stimulating, and clearly devoted to his children and his responsibilities. Their conversations ranged from literature to politics to estate management, and Elena had discovered that they shared similar views on most important matters. He treated her with respect and growing affection, never pushing for intimacy beyond what their formal engagement required. Yet Elena continued to feel as though she were playing a role rather than living her life. She could admire Marcus, respect him, even feel fondness for him, but the deep, transformative love she had dreamed of remained elusive. She wondered if it would come with time, if affection could grow into something deeper, or if she was destined to live a life of pleasant companionship rather than passionate partnership. The wedding preparations had taken on a life of their own. Seamstresses from across the kingdom worked on Elena's dress, a creation of white silk and pearls that was intended to be the most magnificent bridal gown in Valdorian history. Guest lists included nobility from neighboring kingdoms, and the ceremony itself would be held in the Grand Cathedral of the capital, followed by 3 days of celebration. It was during the final week of preparations that Elena received news that would shake the foundations of everything she had accepted about her future. Alexander arrived at Ashworth Manor in the early morning hours, his horse lathered with sweat, and his face grave with urgency. "Elena, I need to speak with you privately," he said without preamble, barely greeting Marcus before pulling his sister aside into the manor's library. "What's happened?" Elena asked, alarmed by her brother's obvious distress. "Is father ill? Has something happened in the capital?" Alexander closed the library door firmly and turned to face her, his young face aged by whatever burden he carried. "Elena, I've discovered something about Duke Marcus that changes everything. I don't know how to tell you this, but his first wife didn't die of illness as everyone believes." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean?" "I've been investigating since your engagement, trying to understand the man who would be my brother-in-law. I hired private investigators to look into his background, his finances, his character. Elena, Lady Catherine Ashworth died from poison. Marcus killed her." The words hit Elena like physical blows. She sank into a chair, her mind struggling to process what Alexander was telling her. The kind man who had spent months patiently courting her, who loved his children so obviously, who had never shown her anything but respect and gentleness, was a murderer? "That's impossible," Elena whispered. "You must be mistaken. Marcus would never. He loved Catherine. He still keeps her portrait in his study, speaks of her with such fondness." Alexander knelt beside his sister's chair, taking her hands in his. "I know how impossible it seems. I didn't want to believe it either. But I have testimony from her lady's maid, who witnessed Marcus administering what he claimed was medicine, but was actually wolfsbane. I have records of his visits to an herbalist known for dealing in dangerous plants. And I have evidence that Catherine had discovered Marcus was embezzling from the royal treasury and planned to expose him." Elena's world tilted on its axis. The man she was scheduled to marry in 5 days, the man who would be stepfather to 2 innocent children, the man who would have access to royal funds and state secrets, was not who he appeared to be. The political marriage that had seemed like a noble sacrifice now looked like a trap that would destroy not only her happiness, but potentially the entire kingdom. "The children," Elena said suddenly, terror flooding through her. "Alexander, if he killed their mother, what about Margaret and Thomas? Are they safe? Why would he keep them alive if they might discover the truth?" "I think they're safe as long as they remain useful to him," Alexander said grimly. "They're his heirs, and they legitimize his claim to nobility. But, Elena, if you marry him, you'll be in constant danger. And, worse, you'll be giving him access to the crown's resources and information that he could use to harm the kingdom." Elena stood abruptly, pacing to the window as her mind raced through implications and possibilities. "We have to call off the wedding. We have to expose him. But, Alexander, we need absolute proof. If we make accusations without irrefutable evidence, it will create a diplomatic crisis. And if we're wrong..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "I have proof," Alexander said, producing a leather portfolio from his riding coat. "Documents, witness statements, financial records. Enough to see him arrested and tried for treason as well as murder." Elena took the portfolio with trembling hands, scanning the documents that would destroy the man she had almost married. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had not only murdered his wife, but had been systematically stealing from royal coffers, using his position and reputation to mask his crimes. The marriage to Elena would have given him even greater access to wealth and power. "He must never know that we know," Elena said, her mind already working through the strategies her education and statecraft had taught her. "We need to get his children away from him without raising suspicion. We need to alert father and the royal guard. And we need to ensure he doesn't escape justice." "Elena, there's something else," Alexander said reluctantly. "One of my investigators overheard a conversation between Marcus and an unknown associate. They were discussing plans to ensure your death appears accidental within the first year of marriage. He doesn't just want your title and access to the treasury. He wants to become regent for our children until he can find a way to claim the throne directly." The full scope of Marcus's ambition and ruthlessness hit Elena like a physical blow. She had been so concerned about sacrificing her happiness that she had never considered she might be sacrificing her life. The kind stepfather, the respectful suitor, the grieving widower. It had all been an elaborate performance designed to position him for the ultimate prize of ruling Valdoria. "We need to save Margaret and Thomas," Elena said with sudden fierce determination. "Whatever else happens, those children cannot be left in his care. They're innocent victims in this, and they deserve better than to be raised by their mother's killer." Alexander nodded. "I've already arranged for them to be invited to spend the day with you at the capital tomorrow, supposedly for final wedding preparations. Once they're safe, we can move against Marcus." Elena felt a strange sense of clarity settling over her despite the chaos of the situation. For months, she had been struggling against a fate that felt wrong, and now she understood why her instincts had been rebelling. It hadn't been about love or freedom or personal choice. It had been about survival, about protecting herself and her kingdom from a predator who had disguised himself as a suitable husband. "There's something poetic about this," Elena said with bitter humor. "I was so worried about losing myself in this marriage. It turns out I would have lost much more than that." As the siblings began planning their strategy to expose Marcus and protect his children, Elena felt a transformation taking place within her. The passive, dutiful princess who had been prepared to sacrifice her happiness for political necessity was being replaced by a woman who would fight to protect everything and everyone she cared about. The third part of Elena's journey was ending with the revelation that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is refusing to become a victim. Tomorrow would bring danger, confrontation, and the true test of whether a princess could become the kind of queen her people deserved. The plan Elena and Alexander devised was delicate, requiring perfect timing and nerves of steel. Elena would return to Ashworth Manor and behave normally, giving no indication that she suspected anything. Meanwhile, Alexander would present the evidence to King Aldrich and coordinate with the royal guard to arrest Marcus at the appropriate moment. The most critical element was ensuring Margaret and Thomas's safety. Elena had arranged for them to visit the capital the next morning under the pretext of final wedding preparations, claiming she wanted them to see their new ceremonial outfits and learn about their roles in the wedding ceremony. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture that the children had come to expect from their future stepmother. Elena returned to Ashworth Manor that evening, her face carefully composed to hide the terror and revulsion she now felt toward the man she had been prepared to marry. Marcus greeted her with his usual warmth, asking about her day and expressing pleasure that she had arranged an outing for his children. "They've become so fond of you," Marcus said as they dined together in the manor's elegant dining hall. "Margaret especially. She talks about you constantly. I think she sees you as the mother she's been missing." Elena had to grip her wine goblet tightly to keep her hands from shaking. Every word Marcus spoke about his children now seemed like a twisted mockery, knowing what she knew about how their real mother had died. She managed to smile and responded appropriately, all while mentally rehearsing the plan that would save them all. "I've grown very fond of them as well," Elena replied honestly. "They're remarkable children. You should be very proud of how well you've raised them despite the tragedy of losing Catherine." The name of his murdered wife rolled off Marcus's tongue without any change in expression. He even managed an appropriately melancholy smile. "Catherine would have loved seeing how Margaret has blossomed under your influence. She always worried about what would happen to the children if anything happened to her." The casual cruelty of the statement made Elena feel physically ill. Catherine had indeed worried about her children's future, but she could never have imagined that their own father was the threat she should have feared most. After dinner, Elena excused herself early, claiming she needed rest before the busy day ahead. Marcus accepted this gracefully, even walking her to her chambers and kissing her hand goodnight in the courtly manner he had maintained throughout their courtship. Once alone in her room, Elena sat at her writing desk and penned several letters. One was to King Aldrich, confirming the plan and expressing her love for her father. Another was to Catherine, her friend and confidant, explaining the situation and ensuring she would be prepared for the chaos that would follow Marcus's arrest. The third was the most difficult to write, a letter to Margaret and Thomas, to be given to them after Marcus was taken into custody, explaining as gently as possible why their father could no longer care for them. Elena spent most of the night awake, listening to every sound in the manor and praying that Marcus had no suspicion of what was coming. Every creak of the old building made her wonder if he was moving through the halls, perhaps planning to eliminate her before she could become a threat. The knife she had hidden under her pillow provided little comfort, but it was better than being completely defenseless. Dawn came slowly, gray and overcast as if the weather itself reflected the dark revelations of the previous day. Elena dressed carefully in a traveling gown of deep green, choosing clothes that would allow her to move quickly if necessary. She also wore a small pendant that Alexander had given her, which contained a whistle that would summon help if blown. Margaret and Thomas were excited about their trip to the capital, chattering over breakfast about what they hoped to see at the palace. Their innocent enthusiasm broke Elena's heart, knowing that their world was about to be shattered once again. But she also felt fierce protectiveness toward them. Whatever it took, she would ensure they had a safe and loving future. "Will you show us the throne room?" Margaret asked eagerly, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Thomas says it's bigger than our entire Great Hall." "I will show you everything you want to see," Elena promised, meaning it completely. "And I want you both to know that no matter what happens, you will always have a place in my life. You've become very special to me." Thomas, with his 12-year-old's developing intuition, gave Elena a searching look. "Is something wrong? You seem different today." Elena knelt to his level, taking his hands in hers. "Sometimes grown-ups have to handle difficult situations, Thomas. But I want you to remember that you and Margaret are safe, and you are loved. Whatever happens today, that will never change." The boy nodded seriously, and Elena could see that he understood more than he was letting on. Children who had lost one parent often developed a keen sensitivity to adult emotions and hidden tensions. The carriage ride to the capital took 3 hours, during which Elena entertained the children with stories and songs while her mind remained focused on the plan unfolding around them. Alexander would be waiting at the palace with King Aldrich and the evidence that would destroy Marcus's carefully constructed facade. Royal guards would already be in position around Ashworth Manor, ready to make their arrest. As they approached the capital's outskirts, Elena could see smoke rising from the direction of Ashworth Manor. Her heart clenched with fear that something had gone wrong. But the smoke was white rather than black, suggesting controlled fires rather than battle or destruction. At the palace, Alexander waited with grave news. "Marcus discovered our investigation," he told Elena privately while the children were being entertained by palace staff in another room. "He tried to flee during the night, but the guards were ready for him. He's been captured, but not before he set fire to several buildings on his estate, presumably trying to destroy evidence." "What about the servants?" Elena asked urgently. "Was anyone hurt?" "Everyone is safe. The fires were contained quickly." "But, Elena, Marcus claimed that you were part of a conspiracy against him, that you had been planning to poison him after the wedding. He's trying to turn this around and make you look like the villain." Elena felt a chill of fear. In the complex world of court politics, allegations could be as damaging as facts if they were spread skillfully. Does father believe him? Of course not. The evidence against Marcus is overwhelming. But there will be those who question why you were investigating your intended husband in the first place. Some will say it shows a lack of faith in father's judgment in arranging the marriage. Elena realized that her ordeal was far from over. Saving herself and the children from Marcus was only the first challenge. Now she would have to navigate the political aftermath, defending her actions and her reputation while ensuring that justice was served. "The children can't go back to Ashworth Manor," Elena said firmly. "Even with Marcus gone, the estate will be under investigation and there will be chaos. They need stability and safety." "Father has agreed to let them stay at the palace for now," Alexander replied. "Elena, he wants to see you as soon as possible. The wedding, obviously, has been canceled, but there are many decisions to be made about your future and theirs." As Elena prepared to face her father and begin the process of rebuilding her life from the ruins of Marcus's deception, she reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. The passive princess who had resigned herself to an unwanted marriage had been replaced by a woman who had actively fought to protect herself and others. The fourth part of her journey was ending with the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on grand stages, but in the quiet moments when we choose courage over compliance. Protection over passivity. 6 months after the dramatic arrest of Duke Marcus Ashworth, Elena stood once again at the windows of Ravencrest Palace, but everything had changed. The view was the same: the emerald gardens, the distant hills, the bustling courtyard below. But Elena herself had transformed from the uncertain princess who had once seen these windows as the bars of a beautiful cage. Marcus had been tried and convicted of murder, treason, and embezzlement. The evidence had been overwhelming, and his execution had been swift. Elena had not attended, but She had felt a complex mix of relief and sadness when it was over. Relief that justice had been served and that he could never hurt anyone again. Sadness for the man he might have been if he had chosen differently, and for the family that had been destroyed by his choices. Margaret and Thomas had remained at the palace throughout the trial and its aftermath. Elena had formally petitioned the court to become their guardian, a request that had been granted without opposition. The children had grieved their father despite his crimes, needing time and gentle guidance to understand that loving someone who had done terrible things didn't make them complicit in those actions. "Elena, are you ready?" Alexander asked, entering her chambers with a mixture of excitement and nervousness on his young face. Today was his coronation day. King Aldrich had decided to abdicate in favor of his son, claiming that the events of the past year had shown him the wisdom of passing the crown to younger, stronger hands. "I'm ready," Elena replied, smoothing the deep blue silk of her gown. As the new king's sister and closest advisor, she would play a significant role in today's ceremony. But, more importantly, she was ready for the new chapter that was beginning not just for Alexander, but for the entire kingdom. The past months had been challenging in ways Elena had never anticipated. The scandal of Marcus's crimes had sent shockwaves through the nobility, forcing everyone to question how such a deception had been possible. Elena had worked tirelessly to help investigate other nobles who might have been involved in Marcus's schemes, rooting out corruption that had been hidden for years. She had also taken on increasing responsibilities in government, working alongside her father to implement reforms that would prevent future abuse of power. Her experience with Marcus had given her unique insights into how predators could exploit trust and tradition, and she was determined to build safeguards that would protect future generations. Most surprisingly to everyone, including herself, Elena had discovered a talent for diplomacy and strategic thinking that made her invaluable in negotiations with neighboring kingdoms. Her near-disastrous marriage had taught her to look beyond surface presentations and trust her instincts about people's true character. "The children are already in their places," Alexander continued. "Margaret looks like a little queen in her ceremonial dress, and Thomas is taking his role as my page very seriously." Elena smiled. Margaret and Thomas had thrived in their new environment, though it had taken time for them to fully trust that their safety was permanent. Margaret had attached herself to Elena with the fierce devotion of a child who had learned not to take love for granted. Thomas, now 13 and growing into a thoughtful young man, had become like a second brother to Alexander, the two of them bonding over their shared love of military history and strategic games. Elena had officially adopted both children, giving them new names that honored their birth heritage while marking their entry into the royal family. Margaret Catherine Valdoria and Thomas Marcus Valdoria were now princess and prince, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entailed. "Any word from James?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Alexander's eyes twinkled with mischief. "The new head of the royal guard sends his regards and says he's honored to be serving at today's ceremony." Elena felt her heart skip in a way that had become wonderfully familiar over the past few months. James Miller, the stable master's son who had unknowingly captured her heart during her darkest period, had been promoted to head of the royal guard after distinguishing himself during the investigation of Marcus's crimes. It turned out that his steady character and keen observation skills were as valuable in security work as they were in managing horses. More importantly, with Elena's changed status as an unmarried royal guardian rather than a political marriage prize, the barriers that had once made their relationship impossible had been removed. They had been courting quietly but officially for 2 months now, taking the time to build something real and lasting. "Elena," Alexander said more seriously, "I need to ask you something before the ceremony begins. I want you to serve as my chief advisor and minister of state. I know it's unprecedented for a woman to hold such a position, but you've proven yourself more capable than any man in the kingdom. What do you say?" Elena felt a surge of pride and purpose that dwarfed any satisfaction she had ever imagined finding in marriage alone. To serve her kingdom in such a capacity, to help shape policies that would improve countless lives, to use her intelligence and experience for the greater good, it was more than she had ever dared dream. "I accept," she said simply. "And, Alexander, I want to propose something else. Let's establish a new tradition. Every member of the royal family, regardless of gender, should be trained in statecraft and given opportunities to serve. What happened with Marcus taught us that we can't afford to waste anyone's talents or judgment." "Agreed," Alexander replied immediately. "In fact, I want Margaret and Thomas to begin formal education and governance as soon as they're old enough. This family has been given a second chance, and we're going to make the most of it. As the siblings made their way to the cathedral where Alexander would be crowned King Alexander I of Valdoria, Elena reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been a reluctant bride-to-be, resigned to a fate she couldn't control. Today, she was a guardian, an advisor, a reformer, and a woman freely choosing her own path. The coronation ceremony was magnificent, filled with ancient traditions and solemn promises. But, for Elena, the most meaningful moment came when Alexander spoke his oath to protect and serve the people of Valdoria. She had helped him write those words, and she knew he would honor them completely. After the ceremony, as the palace filled with celebration and music, Elena found herself once again at her favorite window. But, this time, she wasn't looking out with longing or resignation. She was looking out with hope and determination, seeing not a kingdom that confined her, but a realm full of possibilities she could help shape. "Your Highness," a familiar voice said behind her, and Elena turned to see James approaching with 2 goblets of wine and his characteristic gentle smile. He wore the formal uniform of the royal guard, and he had never looked more handsome. "Just Elena, please," she said, accepting the wine. "At least when we're alone." "Elena, then," James replied, moving to stand beside her at the window. "What do you see out there?" Elena considered the question seriously, looking out over the kingdom that was now her brother's to rule and hers to help guide. "I see home," she said finally. "I see people depending on us to make wise choices. I see children like Margaret and Thomas who deserve to grow up safe and loved. I see a future that we get to build together." James raised his goblet in a toast. "To building that future." "To building that future," Elena agreed, clinking her goblet against his. As night fell over Valdoria and the celebration continued in the halls below, Elena, Princess Royal, Chief Minister, Guardian Mother, and Woman in Love, stood at her window and planned tomorrow's work. The 5th part of her journey was beginning, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to be. The crown she wore now was not one of gold and jewels, but one of purpose, love, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest fairy tale ending is the beginning of real life.